G'day and welcome to this week's Topical Talk. So we are talking about today.
We're talking about social media and the LGBTQIA plus community.
Yeah, and Kate, this comes from you in particular because you've noticed quite a shift since you were at school.
Yes.
In what young people are exposing themselves to online.
Yeah, it's definitely quite different. So I matriculated 10 years ago, so I was in grade 8, just a couple more years ago than that.
Yeah.
And there was always talk sort of a little bit about the LGBTQ stuff. And there were children who were sort of openly gay and those kinds of things. But from the conversations that I've had with teenagers that I work with and going to schools and talking to people there is a massive increase in the amount that it's spoken about. It wasn't a big deal when I was in high school. It was just something that we knew about, but now it's constantly in conversations. There's a lot more children that I know who are identifying within that community to some extent.
Yeah.
And it's just young teenagers are forming opinions on these things at a younger age than when I had to, because it wasn't really such a big deal. Now it's a massive part of the social media space and in high schools as well.
And there's a particular influencer, online person whom we're sort of lifting up their reality this week.
Yeah, so today we're speaking specifically about Jojo Siwa. You may or may not have heard of her. So we wanted to talk about her because of her age, because she's so young. You might think that you have a child in primary school or early high school, you're not so worried about them. They're probably not being reached by this sort of communication or by this specific topic. But for example, she became famous when she was 9 years old. She was in a TV show called Dance Moms. A lot of people from that show have become famous as they've gotten older. So she was 9 when she became famous. She is now 20 years old. She's extremely popular. She has got millions of followers on multiple platforms.
Right.
She has got millions and millions of dollars as well. She's extremely wealthy. She's very well known. She's been on many talk shows. She's mostly famous in America, but sort of all over the world. And she came out as gay a couple of years ago. And ever since then, it's not just that's how she identifies. It's become her entire brand and her entire sort of personality, and everything that she bases her life on is the fact that she's gay. It's the fact that she's part of this community. She attracts children a lot because of her age, because she's been famous for so long. She's got lots of followers, but everything she does is about rainbows and unicorns. It's sparkly. So if you're a child and you're watching this and you're not really focused on what she's saying or doing, a lot of her stuff is kid friendly.
Okay.
She does bring kids in. It's with her dancing. It's very sort of safe.
Yeah.
The initial videos that might bring you in, but if you look a little bit closer, you can see that there's the sort of messaging about the LGBTQ plus community behind it.
All right. And so we're going to reference her also, Ella, to pick up that thread on this as well. So that links in last week to what we said, this presentation of these influencers as this being very family friendly and very innocent, but as soon as you start looking deeper.
Yeah.
So what are some of the things this lady does?
So what you'll find if you just go on her general feed is she just does a lot of dancing. It's very upbeat. She's all about just joy and keeping people happy, which is really cool. Like she does a lot of interviews, and it's those sort of things. So your child or a young person might find themselves on her feed just following that. Unfortunately, as she's kind of gotten older, it kind of seems like she feels like she's joining this fight, this battle for her identity and for this community. So we'll link the videos in the description box, but she has done an interview on a podcast where she actually, at 20 years old, openly talks about her sex life. And if your child is following her in general, it's very likely that a video like that is going to go onto your child's feed. So she talks openly about gay sex and what it was like for her, experiences being different to straight people having sex and experiences in high school and things like that. And it gets a little bit too in detail, very inappropriate for anyone, especially a young person. She likes to discuss, how she knew she was gay, and it's just these sort of little experiences that are very vague. It's the kind of thing where if a young girl was watching it, might definitely make her think, oh, well, I've had that thought before. I've thought that this one celebrity was pretty. Does that mean that I'm gay too? So it's subtle and then not so subtle with the very openly discussed things about sex. But,
So really what we're doing again is encouraging conversation. So with parents and young people, together and to explore a little deeper. And I know that you have got other videos which are perhaps not kind of upfront, which shows even some of these folk within this community. There's heavy jealousy, there's deep struggles that are actually going on. And I know you've got some stats which come from the Reasonable Faith website of William Lane Craig, where there are often these facts are not really well known. So we wanted to lift some of that up to you at what actually happens within this community. And so this is a very well documented, well known, he's an apologist, respected all around the world, Christian apologist. And he has some very good articles on his website. And so Kate's just going to highlight a few that describe what actually goes on. And these are well researched. All the references are below. So not thumbsuck at all.
Yeah, so this is the kind of thing that if you were watching her video and considering the community, she won't mention things like this. She only mentions the aesthetically pleasing and happy, the happy, this is all about joy and love kinds of things. So William Lane Craig mentions the damaging effects of a homosexual lifestyle. And if you go to the article, it's about halfway down, although we suggest you read the whole thing.
It's a long article, but well worth reading.
And there are references for everything that he mentions. He discusses that there's greater promiscuity within the homosexual LGBTQ plus community, that they're more likely to have more sexual partners. It then obviously discusses the higher rate of HIV within the community, other sexually transmitted diseases and infections as well. He discusses loneliness, that they're more likely to be lonelier than heterosexual couples, that the degree of mental disorders and drug and alcohol use is a lot more severe within these communities. He discussed that there's a study that shows homosexuals in general are twice as likely to be depressed, suffer from phobic disorders, or to be dependent on drugs, alcohol, and to have experienced self-harm or have needed to receive psychiatric help. So they're twice as likely as the general population with that. There's also, very sadly, that from an extensive study as well, that attempted suicide among homosexuals is twice as much or twice as common as for heterosexuals. There's also just high risks.
It goes into some of the physical, these realities of sex within these communities. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the things that you really might not want to hear.
So the stuff that you don't want to hear, but this is really at some of the more gritty stuff.
Yeah, and realities that you should know about. So they discuss that the lining of the rectum is very thin and vulnerable to sexually transmitted infections within the gay community. There is a higher risk for HPV with anal cancer as well within the gay community. There are more than 33,000 men and women who are diagnosed with cancers caused by HPV. And there's also an increase in colorectal cancer in young adults. There's just a lot about STDs and things like that, and sort of what this lifestyle does to the body and really damages it. And then he sort of ends with the life expectation and how it's lower. I would definitely say give it a read. There's some slightly sort of gory details in a way, but stuff that if you're watching, if people are talking about the lifestyle on social media, they don't mention.
Which looks so glossy.
And it's all about love and happiness, and these relationships are all supposed to be great and happy, but they're not. And then this is the reality of it. What he's got here, and it's all backed by a lot of research.
Yeah, so it's solid research, global research from the States, etc. Actually, what goes on within these communities. So. Kate, as we said all along, that the struggle is with sexual promiscuity within regular life relationships, marriages, their struggle. And the biblical worldview, which we've been speaking about from Romans 1, clearly we're all sinners. There's this need for universal salvation, and there's this general revelation out there. We've said that we're born into this world where we know what's right and wrong. Romans 1 says that we suppress the truth. And the understanding is from this passage is that when we suppress the truth, one of the sad realities is if we don't acknowledge God as ruler of the cosmos, as the great I am, and then our lateral relationship struggle, our identity, our words. So, and a product of that is what we could call sexual confusion. And Romans 1 describes it like this: when there's this godlessness or this wickedness that comes into the world, they've traded the truth of God for a lie. So there's actually an exchange that's happened.
Yeah.
And part of this exchange is, when God is not honored, is that sexual confusion happens. And this identity struggle that goes on. So verse 24, therefore God gave them over in the sinful desires of their hearts to sexual impurity for the degrading of their bodies with one another. They exchanged the truth of God for a lie and worshipped and served the created things rather than the Creator, who is to be praised. So when the separation occurs, this passage is saying a separation between the Creator and created things. When God is no longer worshipped, then we start worshipping created things or human beings. And you see this online. Yes. These kind of celebrities are kind of worshipped, aren't they?
They are, they're
and what they say is worshipped.
Yes, very much
not
so.
Critiqued.
Yeah, not critiqued at all. The celebrities today are not, someone like Jojo Siwa definitely falls into this, but I mean there's loads of celebrities that people will call mother, which can be Meghan Trainor, but also, you know, someone like Beyonce or something like that. And they kind of discuss how they've built an empire, or I know, very, very sadly, some people, there's churches and things built around people like Beyonce, and there's people who pray to her. So the extent of it is quite big. Yeah,
it's pretty big. So do you think that what the Bible describes as love, we sometimes confuse with lust?
Definitely, especially in the way that we speak about relationships these days. It's often when people are talking about love, it's usually very often the physical relationship or that sort of thing. It's not often on social media discussed as love the way that God loves us in the Bible. It's love in the way that we humanly can understand it without God. If we remove God from it, it's usually about your physical attraction to someone, living with them before you get married, having sex with them before you get married, so that you know that you truly love them enough to maybe one day get married, maybe not. It just depends. And if you love them enough, why do you need to get married? So we're not just sort of focusing on, it's not just an attack sort of on the LGBTQ community. We're talking about all of these kinds of the sins within that realm. So sleeping together before you get married.
Before you get married, premarital sex, or if I as a married man look outside of my marriage, as David did, look over the fence and were to have an affair there, it falls in the same category. It's not
so
just
we're not saying that they're worse.
Not at all.
Sinning worse.
Not at all.
It's all connected to one another.
It's kind of this addiction to sexual decadence almost.
Yeah.
Because there's kind of a pridefulness in it as well.
There definitely is, which is why they call most of what they're doing pride. You have pride parades and things.
Pride parades,
So the reason we're focusing on the LGBTQ plus community specifically now is just because that's the big narrative that's being pushed towards young people today. It's being forced onto their profiles. Most celebrities that your child or teenager follows is very likely either part of the community or a big supporter of the community, which is why we felt we wanted to discuss it. Yeah,
and they're saying, leave us alone, let us do our thing. But we're saying this is way too important, because this scripture is saying that there's a worldview, a Christian worldview, which says that a man was made for a woman and a woman was made for a man, because verse 26 goes on to say, because of this, God gave them over to their shameful lusts. Even their women exchanged natural relations for unnatural ones. In the same way, the men also abandoned natural relations with women and were inflamed with lust for one another. Men committed indecent acts with other men and received in themselves the due penalty for their perversion. So it's almost like, it seems to me, God is saying, if that's what you want, if you want this kind of lifestyle, then you can have it. I'm giving you over to that. And what we're saying is there's actually quite a lot of judgment in that lifestyle.
Yes,
there's a lot of sadness, a lot of disappointment, which we wouldn't want young people to get sucked up into. You've read the stats. We read about the jealousy. And we're not saying that doesn't happen in regular life. But what we are saying is that there seems to be a natural order of things, which is revealed in God's creation. And then this is an unnatural order of things. Could we say that?
Yeah, I definitely say that. I think that's
but we're also saying there's tremendous hope, because at the beginning of this, Paul is writing about he's unashamed of the gospel. So we want to finish with this hope, that the gospel changes lives. And when Paul writes to the Corinthians, he says to them, you were like that. You were caught up in this lifestyle, in this kind of sexual decadence. But because you become a believer, you are now following Christ. You realize that what you're doing was wrong. Whether you've been involved in premarital sex, you've looked outside your marriage, or you're involved in the LGBTQ plus community.
Yeah.
And the gospel changes and transforms. And that's the kind of hope we're trying to offer.
Yeah, that's it. Which is why the conversation with young people is so important. To talk to them openly and non-judgmentally about it, so that you kind of lead them towards a hope and they're not feeling condemned by it. It's just an open, honest conversation about the community and what it actually entails, and being
wise and discerning. So instead of deception, discernment.
Yes.
And helping our young people discern, who are still at the age where these celebrities sound very impressive.
Yeah, they do. That's who's leading them in a lot of ways.
And so parents have to step in. But doing it with grace and truth and tremendous love. We'll see you next time. Thanks so much for listening in.